welcome to the inaugural session of Mindshare. We started this dialogue platform about a year ago, where we thought we would have such topics of social and public interest and get people engaged in a dialogue among themselves, using what is called a Socratic method, where everyone gets to have a say and be part of the dialogue. And so to start off now, we stand. We are very grateful to the LUMS community for supporting us in this initiative, and now Mindshare is going to be a two-limb project. The first one being the dialogue platform, and we're going to have panelists from LUMS faculty to come in and do different topics and discussions. The second limb is going to be we're going to help LUMS students to outreach into schools and do different volunteer work and projects as things go along. Inshallah, after Ramadan, we hope to have weekly talks from this platform. And today, we're very honored to be joined by four of LUMS elitists, if I can call them, scholarship. But they're very close friends of mine, so
I'm taking exception to that.
I think that's where we can start off from.
I take exception to that.
Okay. So, but they're also very well known to me, and I'm very thankful for them to join on this inaugural session. To start off, the person who helped us initiate Mindshare a year ago, I'm going to ask Shayan to come up and just start the introduction. Shayan.
Okay. So I'm really delighted that all of you could be here. I'm going to start the introductions clockwise. First, we have Dr. Farooq Khan over here. Dr. Khan is an associate professor of post-colonial studies at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. He completed his doctorate in post-colonial studies from the University of Kent in 2002. He has also produced a documentary on the women's narratives of the partition of India in 1947, titled Stories of a Broken Self. Then we have Zoe Richards. She is an associate at the law firm Ashtar Ali and Company. She received her Bachelor in Laws from the University of London in 2009 before being called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn. She also has a Master in Laws from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Lastly, on the far right-hand corner, we have Dr. Zubair Abbasi. Dr. Zubair Abbasi teaches Islamic law, corporate law, and Muslim personal law at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. He did his doctorate in law from the University of Oxford. He specializes in comparative law, governance, and economic development. Previously, he did his Master in Laws in corporate governance from the University of Manchester. Moderating this panel will be Junaid Ahmed. He is a visiting faculty at the Sheikh Ahmed Hassan School of Law at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. He has a Juris Doctor from the Marshall White School of Law, College of William and Mary. His research interests include political Islam, Islamist social movements and globalization, US foreign policy, and issues in contemporary Islam, along with comparative constitutional law. So off to Junaid.
Great, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for joining this inaugural session, kindly organized by the Knowledge Factory. I also will not be using the mic. I think my voice is loud enough for all of you to hear. Thank you to the panelists for joining us today for this session. The topic is timely. Of course, that comment can be made perhaps at any point in the history of this country. But it does seem, perhaps to every generation living in the moment, and that the particular context is pressing, is urgent, is dangerous, requires immediate attention, requires a fundamental rethink about the strategies, the visions, so on and so forth, that this country needs to pull itself out of the profound and numerous social, political, cultural problems that it confronts. And I am, again, very pleased to have such an august body of panelists joining me today. And what we will do is we'll have each speaker speak for a little bit, Again, as I have told the speakers, the initial comments that they make should be seen perhaps as some opening remarks, some of their reflections, and each of them come from different disciplines, different angles, and so on, and I think that's a strength to this panel. So those can be seen as opening remarks, opening reflections that they have on this very broad and general topic. And I think what that can then lend itself to is an interesting and rich discussion afterwards, comments and questions that you all have, and that we can all engage. So without further ado, we will begin with Zubair Abbasi to my left, and he will give his remarks, followed by the other panelists, and then we'll open it up. So the floor is yours, Zubair.
Okay, thank you, Junaid, and thank you, Saad, for inviting me here. I'm very pleased to be here. There are so many factories in Lahore, and I was very pleased to see that there is also a factory which produces knowledge. And I'm very happy to be a worker here, and I'm sure that workers' rights in this factory are taken care of. Okay, so we are here to discuss once again Pakistan as at a boiling point. It has ever been boiling. I don't know when it will cool down, but if we can, by the end of this day, propose some solutions which may take Pakistan towards a cooling point, that would be a great product of this knowledge factory. So, what is the boiling point and what is the mess? So definitely I'll speak from my own perspective, as my training is in law, and then my research interest is in Islamic law. So I'll just take that perspective and provide you some insights, some points to think about. My understanding is that one of the biggest problems, one of the challenges which Pakistan faces is the administration of justice in Pakistan, and the legal system of Pakistan, and the whole mess which has been created around it. So the whole slogan behind Taliban is that impose Sharia rights. Sharia is the solution. So ideologically, the challenge which Taliban oppose to the state of Pakistan is that it's an infidel state. As Sufi Muhammad had very famously said, that your parliament, your Supreme Court is all based on kufr, right? It's an infidel. We don't accept you, right? We want Islamic legal system in Pakistan. From political perspective, Pakistan is portrayed as a failing state, which is taking a track which will lead it towards what's happening in Somalia or Afghanistan or Sudan. And one of the things which Pakistan share with these countries is again this slogan of Islam and Sharia. So that's one of the threads which I will be picking up. Second is that this is not the problem of state only. There is also a problem of society. So this Pakistan society is a segmented society. You have slums there, then you have madrasa, Darul Huda, and then you have government schools, then you have LGS, and so many systems. So just by looking into education system, you can see that this is a very segmented society. Whatever problems Pakistan is facing, they are very much linked with this segmentation of society, where we have these smaller islands of prosperity, islands of poverty, islands of excellence, and then islands of complete mess. I want to analyze this mess from a historical perspective. So if you have a look at Pakistani legal system, it's a hybrid legal system. For secularists, it's too Islamic. We have hudud laws, we have blasphemy laws, we have zakat and ushur, we have family laws which are entirely inspired and are based on Sharia. And for Islamists, it's not Islamic enough, because riba is still allowed, and our economy needs to be Islamized. Not enough Islam is applied on the state when it comes to state, when it comes to administration of justice. Administration of justice is expensive. It's replete with delays. So if you want to get justice, you cannot get it from the formal legal system. You have to just adopt some informal systems. So one of the critiques of the system is that there is failure of transplantation of modern state, quote unquote. So when British conquered India, there were some institutional structures which were somehow based on Islamic law, and then gradually they were replaced with English law. So what we see is a problem that there is a conflict between tradition and modernity. So modernity is what is westernization, and tradition is which is associated with Islam. So we see this conflict between these two areas, and they recur time and again. One of the insights which the history of Islamic law provides us is that Sharia or Islam becomes important whenever there is a crisis in society. When state is working smoothly, everything is going fine, no one talks about Sharia. But whenever the state institutions start to crumble, opposition always make a call towards Sharia as solution. This has been happening throughout Islamic legal history. If we see Ottoman Empire, state was working very smoothly, and the moment state become weak and there is a contender to the authority of the state, they make a recourse to Sharia, to Islam. Because Islam and Sharia traditionally, it's discursive, it's plural. Anyone can have its own, one's own interpretation of Islam and then challenge them. Interestingly, both state and opposition use Islam, and you can see that what's happening in Pakistan. Both sides of the conflict, they refer to scripture, to Sharia. Now, my third part, where how to unpack this mess. My understanding is that that is historically inspired, that this slogan that Al-Islam overhaul, that Islam is the solution, this is politically inspired, right? This has no historical foundation. It's not workable because these Islamists ask Taliban, okay, so you propose Sharia as the solution, but how it will work out? What would be the economic policy of the society, of Pakistan? What would be the foreign policy? How you will create jobs? What would be the legal systems? They don't have any framework for this. And this does not simply apply to Taliban, this also applies to Brotherhood in Egypt. They had government for 1 year, what they did, right? So this is very much faith-based approach, that the moment you apply Islam, everything will fall into order. This is not correct. This is not supported historically. But at the same time, I don't want to deny the positive role which religion can play for the governance of society. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Now we'll have Zoe. Can you go a second? Okay, great.
Can everybody hear me even without the mic? Is it okay?
Sorry.
So essentially, my areas of focus, I mean, I agree with Zubair said wholeheartedly. My areas of focus has essentially been women, minority rights, and education. So within that framework, essentially, the way I see Pakistan at the moment is in a bit of a rut of sorts. First and foremost, because if you look back over the past 30 years, our education policies have been regressive periodically. So instead of, infusing new light into the curriculum that we're teaching within our public school system, we're actually removing poetry, we're actually removing critical thought, we're removing an appreciation of things that are different, thereby providing students at a very early age with a single narrative of how things ought to be. As far as questioning goes, questions aren't encouraged. You can't ask why in class because at times your teachers don't even have the answer. So the divide between the public versus the private school system is so great, with no effort being made to train the teachers, to have a training program of sorts, to have a certification program of sorts, to make sure that these very people who are supposed to educate our masses are actually doing that, whether they're sowing the seeds of asking questions or categorically making students who are afraid to challenge the status quo. So there is that element to the areas per se that I'm interested in, looking at how education has affected us over the years, whether it's legal education, whether it's health, for instance. A lot of the doctors that we're producing at the moment are very cognizant of how to deal with a certain problem without even going the extra mile of going into patient care, for instance. So you go into a hospital, you'll get the best treatment ever, but you won't get a smile from the doctor, and at times that's what the patients need. So these are small areas that we are lacking in terms of capacity building that over a large period of time will lead to some sort of decay into the societal fabric. Now, secondly, in terms of the legal system, I agree that at times you go towards religion to find the answers because when nobody is hearing you, such as the state, which has failed to provide you with electricity, failed to provide you with security. Electricity security have become a private enterprise in that you have to provide your own electricity. If you don't get it, get a generator. If you don't have guards, you need to get guards now because everybody is out just to save themselves. So this entire concept of individualism, and not a good individualism of sorts whereby there's an exchange of ideas, but a bad individualism in which all you are protecting is your own selfish interests, is probably what in the longer run would lead to further decay per se. So I'm essentially an optimist, but right now, standing from where I am, having studied where I have studied and having traveled as much as I have, until and unless there is a genuine effort, not just on part of the government, but also on part of the civil society to change things in the long term, we can conduct as many operations as we want, but we still won't be eliminating the problem itself, which is a lack of tolerance. We are so overcome by intolerance at what, in a small situation, you can look at how, okay, you don't like what somebody else is wearing. Instead of just commenting on it and letting it go, you will make sure you say that over and over again. It's just the psyche. It's what has happened over a period of time. It's what we're taught ever since we go to school. So that stays with you. Apart from that, what happens is, okay, you can go abroad, get a fancy education, have the time of your life, and then you come back and you want to change things, but as much as you have changed yourself, the things around you really haven't. They've probably, worsened off. So having support groups of sorts, I think that is also necessary. Like we have one over here where we're sitting discussing thoughts and ideas. And I think that essentially what we failed to do over the past 7-8 years is invest in people. So we're building all of these amazing roads, we're building these development projects, we're building the Alpha Tower, we're doing schools, we're building roads, but are we actually building the capacity of people? Are we making people so strong on their own 2 feet that they can stand up for themselves? They are aware of their rights, they know exactly what it is that is owed to them in a professional environment, what is owed to them in a social environment. I don't think we're doing that per se. I think, yes, we're doing a lot of good things, but a lot of things that need to follow with it. You can build a school, but till you get the kids to it, until you get a good resource situation where you have the best administration possible, a school is just a building where you go to spend your day. So I think essentially investment needs to be made into the quality of things that we're doing. Asking questions needs to be encouraged as opposed to saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, we know best. So I understand that there are cultural norms and social norms. That's what makes Pakistan really interesting, because you're trying to have this conversation of progress against a backdrop of a society which is essentially traditional at the heart of it. So you can't really walk really fast and expect everybody will walk behind you. You have to take everyone along with you. So I think, conversations such as Mindshare, conversations such as bringing the four of us together and having a conversation, that leads to some sort of change happening, because you might go home and think about what one of us said and say, oh, maybe I should encourage my students to ask questions, or maybe I should be more open about answering questions when people ask them to me. Another thing that I read a couple of days ago was Asma Jahangir's interview in Dawn, in which she said this country is on a suicide mission. And at that point in time, I really agreed with her thought process, because if you look at it, the educational institutions are failing. The terrorists have taken over essentially. There's a warped version of what ought to be done and what ought not to be done going around. The media is selling whichever story floats their boat. So in all of that, the whole idea of what is Pakistani gets lost somewhere, because essentially what we need to understand is that being Pakistani doesn't really mean ticking off a checklist. You can be Pakistani and love a different color than what the 99% loves. You can be Pakistani and be Christian, be Pakistani and be Hindu, for instance. You don't really need to have a checkbox of what it is to be Pakistani. And I think because we don't understand groups as they operate, we're just wanting to put each and every group into this one big box, and that is really hard because everybody is different. So how are you going to fit everybody into this one mold that you have pre-decided yourself? That's where essentially, to my mind, the problem comes in. As far as question goes, I'm happy to answer any and all questions about women, empowerment, religion, freedom of religious belief. I work with Asma Jahangir. I'm a practicing lawyer. I practice in the high courts of Lahore, sometimes Karachi, most times Islamabad. So I get to see a lot of different things that are happening. Yesterday I was in court. Rana Sanalla came to record his statement for the PAT case that was happening. So we came out of court, we were doing a company case. We come outside and we see this entire jam-packed hallway and downstairs with cameramen and Rana Sanalla in the middle, and there are 4 bomb disposal squads, and there's an ambulance at the back, and we're like, pandemonium happening. But what a situation like this does essentially is it makes you strong. So you know exactly where the exits are. That's one thing that I started doing. Watch out for where the exits are. So in case you need to run off, you know how to do it. But generally, I think the reason I came back and I wanted to be here was because the only change that can happen is in a place that needs it. If you're in a place that is completely developed, has no problems whatsoever, your quality of life might be better, but the whole yearning for answers isn't there. I mean, there's no fulfillment per se. So that's about it from me. Over to Dr.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very insightful observations there. I think that we all can engage in discussion. And finally, my dear colleague and dear friend, Dr. Farooq Khan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to Meri awaaz aa rahi? Can you hear me? Yeah? Very happy to be here. Well, not really very happy, a bit scared having too many lawyers. These are a dangerous group at
Look
the
for the
moment.
exits.
Okay, no, I am very happy to be here, play some part in hopefully the discussion that would take place. I think it is a very important, very timely topic. Pakistan at a boiling point. And again, if one kind of checked the temperatures, Pakistan was indeed at a boiling point with temperatures running at 46 degrees and 47 degrees. So literally, you guys have chosen the right topic. So one way to kind of get out of the temperature mess was maybe for Pakistan to invent better, electrical or cooling systems which would solve the message was indeed boiling. And I think if temperatures are cooled literally, and I think in discourse, the debate becomes better. People are not really so excited, so hot under the collar literally. So again, if it is a time to tackle or unpack this mess, then I think what is really important is for one to understand how is it that this mess has come about. To tackle a problem, first thing is that we have to understand what that problem is. Second is, in a sense, if one is looking for ready-made answers, they are provided every day from 7 to 11 every evening. You have plenty of people, you have Pakistanis, you have journalists, you have religious figures, you have, I don't even know, a figure, things coming from Canada, and they telling us that we will provide you with the answers. So in a sense, what essentially I'm saying is that one needs to actually sit down, look at what is it that we are defining mess as. Is that mess for people who live in defense? Is it mess for religious minorities? Is it mess for students? What mess? What do we understand by this mess? Are we talking about failure of the state? Are we saying that certain institutions which exist in our country are not working well? In a sense, I mean, is mess, for example, being caught up in a traffic jam? Is there a mess? Problem, or in a sense, I think that is for me, again, for somebody who comes from literature background, one needs to. The most difficult part is actually understanding the law, to look at the complexity of the problem that, in a sense, one is faced with. And I think at times it has become rather fashionable to kind of cover oneself in this kind of this self-pitying maze of victimhood, and in a sense indulge in these generalizations. Pakistan mein to, har cheez kharab hai. Pakistan mein, everything is in a mess. The system needs an overhaul, and each person or each group which comes and they say that ours is the right answer. Or, the military people coming and they say, Pakistan is, you need a danda and then you will understand. I mean, are we what? Cattle hai, sheep. Don't we understand discourse? Don't we understand the reason? Okay. So, in a sense, those quick fixes, I think that never really solves the problem, at least in my opinion. Secondly, I think what is important is one needs to historicize again this mess, whatever it is that we are talking about. Things have not always been the same. Okay? This ahistorical understanding of events is what, in a sense, the West did when it was looking at the non-Western countries. You had the whole discourse of Orientalism, which was embedded in that. And these people in the Middle East, these primitive, they've always been like that. What does always mean? Okay? You say, situation has been like that for 11 years. Was it like that 15 years ago? Was it different 30 years ago? Will it be the same in another 10 years from now? Things are never, in a sense, it is the sheer impossibility of things remaining the same. Whether one understands it or not, it is impossible for the way that things are today for them to remain the same tomorrow. They would become worse, they would become better. Okay? And that is where I think it becomes important for people for them to kind of actually engage. And this is something that, in a sense, when one is talking with one's students, that one says, and as I think like Zoe very rightly mentioned, that many of us, one could be in other places where things were comparatively better, where there was no mess. But I think like as people here and people in the audience who've had experience abroad, and these are things one has not come back here to be a martyr. And I remember when I was studying again as an undergraduate in the US, the first thing that one noticed that people who were from India and Sri Lanka as a collective, maybe there were certain exceptions, they said, no way man, we are not going back. Okay? For Pakistanis, who were our seniors and our class, almost 99% of the people, they said, oh, we are coming back. But now, in other like even in both countries, situation has changed. So that whole point of historicization, how is it that things have reached this particular time that people say, oh, things have always been this way. This is a terrible place. Personally, I don't think it is. I think we just need to understand what is it that one is trying to tackle. Secondly, I think very important is that one has to think about and take responsibility for have we in any way contributed for this mess? Or do we have, politicians, they are terrible, they are the ones who are responsible. Maulvis are terrible, they are the ones who are responsible. Military is terrible, they are the ones who are responsible. Judiciary is terrible, they are the ones who are responsible. Bureaucracy is rubbish. Media, so in a sense we all have our pet heroes. I think at the end of the day, we have to see that in our own little way, what is it that we have done which might not have exacerbated the situation, but it hasn't helped in making things better. So personally, I mean, I'm not necessarily somebody who is engaged in the bigger picture. I'm much more concerned with the individual, because the individual then, if he or she is important enough, or in a sense is able to gather his or her thoughts, then they formulate things, and groups, that's how groups are formed. Lastly, how do we solve this mess? I mean, like again, as I said, personally, I think there are certain issues, there are certain problems, and that is true for different sectors, for different aspects. But what one needs to realize is that are these problems which are unique to Pakistan, or are these problems which are, in a sense, part and parcel of post-colonial nations? That in a sense, if you are in Nigeria, if you are in, Benin Republic, if you are in Kenya, if you are in India, are these things which are some of these kind of, as I said, some of these little troubles that make up this mess, are these things which are just peculiar to Pakistan? I don't think so. Okay. So I think one needs to pay attention to things. One needs to have certain focal points that one is able to engage with. And as an individual, I mean, I'm saying that, okay, fine, this is something that one feels that it is important. So I will work in education. I will try to inform my students for them to become better Pakistanis, for them to, most importantly, engage with their surroundings. If one develops an affinity and understanding of, in a sense, society, wider community that one is part of, there is no way that one is not able to make a difference. So this is where I'll just stop, and then if people have questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. I certainly have some thoughts that I'd like to share, but I will put those on hold for now. Just one point I really liked that Dr. Farah Khan raised, and that is to not necessarily see the problems that exist in Pakistan as unique to this particular third world country, post-colonial country. The post-colonial perspective, seeing Pakistan as a country that is part of the broader, larger developing world, or what some call the global south, formerly colonized world, that has experienced a whole host of problems in terms of state formation, societies, artificial boundaries, all sorts of dislocations because of colonialism and the post-colonial condition afterwards. You will notice remarkable similarities in many of these societies. And that is not obviously to say that each of them don't have their own particular context, particular histories, and so on. But that's very, very important. And I think one of the issues that I may even get into a little bit later on is with Muslim societies, and this is an area that obviously I deal with a lot, there is often a tendency to look at them through the prism of Orientalism, through the prism of what one French scholar called theologocentrism. That is the obsession with Islam and religion as basically explaining everything that happens. Any phenomena, any development that happens traces its origins to religion.
Yeah.
Rather than engaging other factors, perhaps historical, material, economic, social, that one would use in analyzing other societies, one tends to just see religion and Islam as being the overall framework that they're doing it because, well, the Quran tells them to, or there was this, or some legal scholar, some jurist said this in the 8th century. This is why Muslims behave the way they do. And as you all will probably agree, that's a bit simplistic. That is a bit simplistic. So I think it's incredibly important, the point about Orientalism and not seeing the conditions of, say, Pakistan or Muslim societies in general as unique to those societies, but as contextualizing them as part of the broader post-colonial condition that many countries also suffer and undergo. Anyways, let's at this stage open it up to all of you for questions, comments, no speeches please, but certainly we do want a rich discussion. So please, the floor is now open. Yeah, please.
When you said that we need to invest in education, putting religion aside, and how we invest in roads and like buildings and the schools the building, so the day, invest how, like, even if we put in money, the government does provide money for like education and everything, we need people, administration that's actually educated. And when you said that how Canada wishes to provide answers and everything, we do actually need help from educationists like internationally, because we don't really have like proper administrations, or like, because most of the population in Pakistan isn't really educated, so they can't really answer questions. So what's your take on cultural differences?
Did you say cultural deficit?
Differences.
Cultural differences, okay. Sorry, I was being naughty. Go ahead.
Right, so essentially, as far as the Canada comment went, that was, I think, a direct title called describe the country, not really,
Not a figure, I don't know what it is.
not really actually
I didn't pick that
giving
up.
help or anything of that sort. Essentially, I agree with you completely. Yes, you need help from abroad. You need to partner with different organizations. You need to have some sort of exchange of ideas happening so that you can transplant them and see what an indigenous solution for your country would be, right? Completely agreed on that. The problem is it's not just money that needs to be invested, right? Everybody's talking about money per se. So yes, 30 billion has been allocated to schools and to doing this and to doing that. But how much has been allocated to actually bringing in a group of trainers, to getting all the teachers to sit together and doing icebreaker activities with them? Is that even considered necessary? No, because the way things go is through a reference point, right? If I have a reference point for doing a one-on-one discussion with people and seeing that, oh, one-on-one discussions actually help, that's the side I would lean towards more. If there's someone else who thinks that, group discussions go a long way in fostering some sort of understanding, that person would have a reference point for group discussions going up ahead. Currently, the government that we have in power has a reference point for economics, has a reference point for making things and building things. Not so much a reference point for how valuable a good education would be, right? Because essentially, in terms of education per se, I don't think qualifications have ever been called into question with the ruling party. Everybody has just accepted, okay, yes, all you need is a bachelor's degree and that's about it. It doesn't matter where you studied from. It doesn't matter what you studied, as long as you have the necessary backing to be in politics, right? Whereas abroad you have a shadow government, you have people actually studying to be under secretaries who will then come into power once the secretaries resign. So here it's a bit of an ad hoc system. So with that in place, the way to deal with something would be to have people telling these people as advisors that, okay, maybe these loans that you have started to give. This morning there was an announcement that the Prime Minister's house is about to start issuing interest-free loans. What is the guarantee that the loans that you are giving out, they'll give the same return as is expected? I want to be a fish market owner, but I'm in a landlocked place. Who's going to give me the advice that's going to say, okay, dude, don't invest in the fish, go and get a fruit market stall. Buy a donkey so that you can sell, wares on that. That would be a better thing to do. So there is the will to do things, but the execution is lacking. You can look at the metro system like we were talking about. At Kalma Chowk, whereas the bus could have easily gone overhead, we could have avoided that signal that's there. Every time you have to wait there, the bus comes to a complete halt, then you move, and then the bus moves. The whole idea was a rapid transit system that gets completely bellied because this entire bus just comes and stops at Kalma Chowk for a good 2 minutes. So again, that's just poor planning. The will is there, the interest level is there, it's just poor planning and poor execution, and the only way that will change again is through the larger democratic exercise of going out and voting and making sure the people you want get into power. But till that point in time, there needs to be constant, I'd say, activism of sorts from the general public that says, okay, let's try and make sure that these loans that are coming out, let's devise a project that says, okay, we'll have 5 people sitting over here, for instance, the knowledge factory, and one will operate as a CEO, one will operate as a CEO, and there's this think tank in Montana called Montech that does it. So it's government funded, everybody who gets a loan comes to this place, you guys sort out your financials for you, get you a company up and running, and after that they hand it over to you to run as you wish. And then they're monitoring you every 2-3 months to see how well you do and whether you break even. So it's about putting the thought into the money that you're spending on people. Yes, there's a lot of money going around, but the thought behind it isn't really there. So I hope, is there another counter question you have?
Yeah, you know how universities base their criteria and they're just like, for instance, there are only like 5 universities that are internationally recognized and give good education. Then how do you expect students to fulfill the criteria and study here and not go get advanced education when their criteria is lower?
Okay, so as far as education criteria go, I talked about how there's the private-public divide in terms of education, right? So there used to be a certain amount of investment being made. There's an organization called RUB, and it's been set up by a friend of mine who was with me in Boston whilst we were studying, and what RUB does essentially is run summer camps with these public schools, and the core curriculum for the summer camps is critical thinking, drama, debates, group exercises. So all of these students from public schools are learning this wide variety of things in the summer free of cost, because this one organization thought, okay, instead of just talking about it, let's just take all of this to them. The kids are having a whale of a time, the teachers don't have a problem because they're not being billed for anything, they're not having to come in the summer vacations to school to make sure this runs. It's an NGO with the idea that they want to make a difference. And that's how they're going about doing it. So if you tackle a group of kids who are 10 to 15 years in age, you're putting them through drama, you're putting them through debates, you're making them stage a show at the end of the time that they've spent with you, and you're volunteering with them, automatically you are giving over some of the stuff that you've learned. And when those kids finally get to the stage where they're doing their O-levels or their A-levels or their matriculation or their FSC, all of this will have a bearing on the final product per se. So it will have to be done in small leaps and bounds, so to speak, but this is what I generally think is at, like education and making sure that education puts in a critical level of thinking in the students involved.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Did you?
I'll just add something to that, which is one of the things which was an example that was coming to mind, which is, and this was in response to what you said, that for us it becomes almost very easy for us to say, okay, fine, in democracy, go and vote for the right people. But in a sense, what is it that one does after that? That was the easy part. And the example that comes to my mind is, I don't know how many of you have seen Shawshank Redemption. Okay, there is this prisoner, okay, Andy, he's the protagonist. He feels that in the prison system they don't have a library. So what is it that he does? He starts to write a letter to the person who is again board of directors or whatever. Doesn't get a response. So, but in a sense, for his part, what he makes almost a mission of his life is that he writes a letter every day to that person. At the end of the day, the person he is writing to gets sick and sick of this whole thing and says, okay, here are these 10,000 rupees. But then he starts to follow up. He starts to write more letters till they are able to get that life. The point is that in a sense, if one wants to change, if one wants to deal with the mess, then one has to invest time in that. One has to see what is it that I, as an individual, what is it that I can do. So just going for and voting, I mean, nice as it is, or in a sense just saying that, sitting down and one saying that, okay, fine, here is something that, I'm engaged in for, like, I don't know, I've spent a month or a week in this and I haven't gotten the results. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the thing is to bring about a change. If things have become this bad, it has taken certain amount of time to make them right. It would take you longer, but that's the whole point. That this is a challenge, and it's a challenge for you to make a name for yourself. Okay, for you to say that, okay, here is something that I have put in the effort. Okay. There's a Punjabi, I don't know, obviously, Mali da kam pani dena parvarushka palo, Malik da kam halpul lana. Listen, the point is that you as an individual, you have to put in the effort. The rewards or the results, the desired results, that's in somebody else's hand. They shouldn't necessarily be, one shouldn't be so, in a sense, egotistical or narcissistic to say that, I'm the one who's going to bring about this change. You put in the effort, okay, and see what the results are. And even if they are not to your liking, it doesn't really matter. That doesn't mean that one should have not put in the effort. So again, my suggestion to students and to people that one engages with this, that you have to keep on trying and not say that, okay, fine, that now is the time to give up. Okay, maybe give up on that, but start trying on something else. That's how you stay engaged with the wider community. That's how you stay alive. That's how you, in a sense, you're truly able to make a difference, not just by sitting. I mean, like, I was interested in this, that's why I came here. I'm interested in it, that's why I'm teaching. Okay, one is not saying that, okay, everybody becomes an engineer or a jihadi or whatever it is, in whatever capacity that you have. I mean, now, for younger people, it is fantastic. I mean, now with the electronic, media, with things that we are able to do with Facebook, with Twitter, with so many other things, these are fantastic ways, and these are comparatively easier ways to put pressure, to, in a sense, subvert the discourse which is being put forth by powerful groups. You can be like 10 people sitting here, you can bring about a revolution. So I think that that is something which is important, that one has to, especially young people, because one of the things which kind of pains me is, and again having spent some time in South Asian countries and abroad, which one really finds sad is for young people who become pessimistic or who become quote unquote practical. Young people should not be practical. Young people should be ideal dreamers. You should be idealists. Your instructor is saying something that it can't be done, rubbish, I don't believe you. I can do it. Your parents are saying it can't be done, no, challenge them. Okay? So young people, and that's again, if there are teachers, that's what you should tell your students. Do not, because we are not really able to see what they are able to see. Okay? So please do not take any limitations upon your thinking or the things that you can do. And especially in a place like Pakistan.
Thanks, Sultan. There's a couple of more questions we have. So let's.
May I get a comment on that?
There was a hand before.
I don't mind, but I think
yes.
you answered my question quite clearly.
Okay. Brief comment. It's on the same thing.
Just a comment,
Farooq is fine. Dr. Barbar was disconcerting side.
Basically, in principle, your emphasis on the individual's role, on the citizen's role is very, powerful. But once we see, we want to bring in change within some, time frame. Obviously, like, this the lineage mark people, their emphasis on the individual aspect, rather than, splitting class and coming to the government and coming from the top or bottom up. The bottom up approach probably you are advocating. Fully agree with you. It's the individuals who, are the pillars of the whole society. But the state and the structures, they, to my mind, they are of very high practice. Because one is that they carry more power, they carry more resources, and they also have more gathering power. Like individuals, it's very difficult, to get together. They, do special just how to practice things. Both, I feel, at both levels, especially the high top-down level, but I'm referring to, their responsibility is much more, because individual is also very much engaged, almost fighting to death even for survival. So, except a little float class, I think two sides, especially I feel our top people, they need to be shaken and they need to work. They need to work.
Absolutely. I completely agree, but it's just one thing is that the state, what is the state's role? The state's role is always to protect the power that it has over the individual. That in a sense, that's what in quote unquote developed societies, the states intervenes at levels which is kind of almost unimaginable in developing countries. So it is actually fantastic to be in places like Pakistan where the state cannot intrude upon you so minutely. So, bilkul hai, but that's what the state does. The state is there to control you, and that's why, in a sense, it is so important for the individual to fight back, for individual to subvert. If it was easy, it would have been done, long time ago. But because one should take this fight because it is difficult, because this is a challenge. So, again, that's my response to it.
So we have a couple of other hands. Yeah, in the back.
Sir, I understand when you say it's the absence of will, actually. People, absence of will, which actually,
And by the way, we can take comments. We don't have to respond
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
necessarily.
yeah.
We can also just, that's fine.
Yeah, but I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So it's the absence of the will, which is part of the problem, I guess, part of the solution, whatever you want to say. I think, so what are the founding steps? I mean, it's not the education. No, that's a long-term goal. But what are the short-term goals that need to be achieved in order to, maybe outline a direction, or give a direction to the people, or maybe a society, maybe a certain direction.
See, one can't, direction is within you. आपके पास direction के लिए तो that's what you
spiritual. Spiritual is saying. You talk about more being spiritual there. I'm saying, okay, I'll say, in my opinion, it's totally the people. They need to decide what they want. If they want education, give them education. If they want, investment in metro bus, give it to them. Referendum is very important. Why are we scared of holding referendums? Why are we scared of being part of the political process or electoral process? Why do we want to target the National Assembly? Why not the local bodies? I mean, the solution. I'm from Pakistan. I'm from an undeveloped area, and I know where the solution lies. I think, but we are targeting these problems like metro buses. I'm sure if you go to Ghana now, or maybe the chief minister, we can convince him that these fund institutions, make them better. Now there's a prime example. Now there is now a state-of-the-art institution. I mean, giving people, they can go or Assad can be a process room, and they just go and there are cabins, and the process is quick.
Now there is a horrendous body which tries to get
horrendous body.
वो नहीं करेगा. Again, the thing is modernization ये ना करे best वाला.
Let him complete the point that we can respond.
As compared to other institutions like IBCC जहाँ एक student A-levels का
ठीक है, point taken.
क्विज़ बनाने जाता है और वहाँ 3 दिन तो गौर होता है ना पूरा. फिर 14 दिन समझ आती है अच्छा यार ये. Then just stop metro bus को छोड़ के. I'm sure कि everything can be sorted out with discussion, but telling them okay, referendum करना. I mean, I'm sure कि यहाँ 10 लोग चीज़ पे कोई common point पे agree कर रहे हैं. I'm just saying कि let's direct those funds towards improving institutions. I'm sorry for absence of will.
We're telling Pharaoh to free your slaves, huh? It doesn't happen like that, huh?
I think it's more got to do with the answer. Accountability needs to be there. We need to come back again and again, talk to people, create forums, And founding success can be done again, having a transparent electoral process. That's it.
Right.
Many of the people, they need to be.
Let's get a couple of more. Thank you very much. Yes.
Alright, being an educationalist, a philanthropist, someone really, really concerned with what's happening and with a deeper insight. When you say, when so much is wrong, a brief comment is just not something I can give, I'm sorry. But I totally agree with Buzui had to say, I'm a principal, I'm an educationist, so I've been exactly giving the same trainings last week. The importance of asking questions, the importance of critical thinking, the 4 C's of the 21st century and things like that. We've been talking about it over and over and trying to just drop by drop, get a little bit of change in these mindsets that are too narrow, too close, and then this thing that we need to be dreamers, and then the fact that yes, the maturity over time teaches us that we can only influence certain, there's a huge circle of concern, policies, talking about it, all is wrong, and then the smaller circle of influence, what we can do, right? What we can do within that system, and that is what we need to touch. When we say that, no one smiles, do we smile? Do we really? Do we appreciate? I mean, when we go around, do we actually say, oh, I really like the way you're wearing, I really like this thing that you're saying, no, this is wrong, this is everything. And talking about empowering, and if we say that the state doesn't want to empower the people, and of course for reasons which are too clear, do we want them to empower them, really? Because think about it, what gives us respect in the society? This accent of ours, this Angrezi,
That's right.
this foreign education, these cars that we are driving, these brands that we are wearing. And what really gives us respect is not our wisdom, our honesty. How many times have we stood and respected a man for being very, very honest, still driving a Vespa, but he has given his life to honesty and he decided not to take in shortcuts. So it's more like, trying to strive, trying to struggle, trying to swim and not be part of the lower middle income class or the lower income class in a society like Pakistan. Because yes, it's exploited. Yes, it's too much exploited, I would say. And we continue to be part of that culture. Do we want our servants to be empowered? No. It's good. Oh, the West में तो कोई domestic help नहीं है. We come back here to enjoy all those luxuries and it's amazing. It's excellent. If you have the right education here, you've been to a good institution, you have it worked out, and then you can say, all right, what's this, So are we really, really giving that respect out? Are we really appreciating people for the right things, for a change? I love your car. Excellent point made. Come on, go above that, go beyond that. Look within those people and see, you will find so much more. Now, we asked him, because being a principal, I get to attend many such platforms where we're talking about a lot of things. Rab I met his owner and excellent work that he's doing and things like that. But yet again, we speak about English being a very complex thing here in Pakistan. I mean, if currently you can speak really well in English, you're really not accepted. How many times do we go around appreciating a person who is probably from a very humble background, cannot speak in English but makes a very valid point, or makes a point that could actually change Pakistan? How many times do we say, excellent boy, I'm going to help you out with this thing? So do we really want them with us, sitting right here next to us? Do we really want that? I mean, we need to start asking this question ourselves to us only, because I believe that is what reality is, that we can only change our own selves, really. We need to start giving out the smiles more often. We need to start appreciating people for the right reasons more often. We need to start standing up for the right persons at the right time more often. I think that is where the social changes will take place, gradually and to be more honest.
Thank you very much. Great, 1 second, great point, all great points. And I will make an exception to my rule of being brief when there's such great points made like was made here. No, I mean, I thoroughly agree with many of them, and I'm sure the panelists, but we have a lot of hands, so I do want, just write them down. We will come back to a lot of these points, but thank you for those points. Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
So my question is to Dr. Zubair Abbasi. Talk about how the fault lines in our legal system has made many of the people in Pakistan and all throughout Muslim societies want more and more Sharia. So when you see there being Sharia zones all through the world, like you have now the ISIS in Iraq, and then you have large swaths of territory under Islamist control in Syria, and then you had Taliban rule and so on. Does that make is that deterring people from wanting more and more theological rule? And secondly, why do you think is it that many upper middle class people, educated people, also generally want theocratic rule when it's really clear that under traditional Islamic law you cannot have equality between Muslims and non-Muslims and men and female? I mean, let's be clear about that.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very happy that somebody gave attention to me. Otherwise,
No.
all right, so you have raised 2 points. One is that you just see these Sharia zones, and then second is that why do people want Sharia? One thing which we need to be very clear about it, that what actually Sharia is, right? So when ISIS or Taliban or Al-Shabaab, they are just talking about Sharia, what do they mean by it, and what actually Sharia is, right? So when you open up any book, what we call Sharia, that is technically should be called fiqh, right? So let's see that if you want to see how to enter into a contract, when a contract becomes valid, right? A fiqh book will tell you that, okay, Imam Abu Hanifa said this, Imam Abu Yusuf said this, and Imam Shaybani said this, and these are their arguments. It does not tell you that when a contract will become a contract. And in order to get a certainty, you need then this issue to be either given a fatwa by a mufti, or it need to be adjudicated by a qadi. So you need some formal institution in order to say what Sharia is, right? So this whole slogan that Islam is a solution and Sharia is a solution, this is very much problematic, because Sharia is discursive, it's pluralistic, right? So it's very much politically driven. Either it is in Muslim countries or in the West, where you have these Sharia compliant zones, right? So the political context is important. And coming to your second point, that why these middle class and educated people, they want Sharia. My understanding is that Sharia and Islam is also connected with your identity. So specifically when we see in the West, and I have personal experience of UK, you see that what we should have ideally observed should have been a synthesis between Islam and the Western values, right? So this should have been the ideal situation. So you take morality, you take honesty, and these values, your feeling yourself to be conscious towards God and to your own conscience. And then with Western values of hard work, discipline, it should have given you a wonderful synthesis. But this is not actually happening. What is happening is totally other way around. So British-born Pakistanis are more Pakistanis than Pakistanis, right? So my friends, they could refuse to eat any food that was not halal, although Islamic law allows you Zabiya Ahlul Kitab, right? So this is related with their identity, because they have this siege mentality that their minority, if they do not protect themselves, they will be absorbed by the majority. So this is what I can answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to respond as well, but I'll save it. Yeah, right here.
My question would go on to Mr. Abbasi and to some extent to Junaid as well. Given the context of presenting Islam as a solution for everything, how do you think we can actually find a solution? Because if we step entirely out of Islam and say that religion को बिल्कुल लाना ही नहीं है और बस एक बिल्कुल बाहर से लाके solution ला देना, it is never going to be politically acceptable. We as a society, we have a feudal mindset. हर चीज़ हमारी property है. To the extent, I was reading an article the other day, even हमारी जो ख़वातीन है वो भी हमारी property है by some odd reason. or we've seen land reforms being shot down under the veil of Islam, obviously, the Abya Trust case. अब given the situation, अगर आप कहते हैं कि इस्लाम को बिल्कुल नहीं बीच में लाना और बाहर से कोई हल निकाल लेना है, that would never be acceptable. So, I mean, do you think the solution has to come from within the framework of, within the larger framework of religion, or do you think that a completely, say, anti-religion, religious approach, do you think it can still work?
Do you want to move first? Or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is very good, very good point. Because this is how we have been trapped, what I should call in our history, right? So, the language we speak, the type of clothes we wear, the type of institutions we go, all are westernized, right? So this is a challenge, what scholars call a challenge of modernity. So this is, this phenomena is also happening within Western societies. So when modernity made us sweep, even within those societies, people felt these conflicts, right, within their societies. But this phenomena is even more acute in Muslim world because this whole modernity was kind of quote unquote imposed on them through either colonialism or through colonial hegemony. So the structure of the state and various structures like education in the form of university, schools, and state institutions, legislature, judiciary. This is not denying that state existed in pre-colonial Muslim states in one form or the other. But this sweep of modernity over Muslim lands has been a huge, what we call historically a great exogenous shock in institutional economics. So it was an external thing which just came over, and then people were caught unaware. Right? So now coming back to your point, that where does the solution will come from? Frankly speaking, I don't have any answer to it. But if I can speculate based on my research, and I'm doing Waqf and land reform, this is something of my area of my research. My thesis at Oxford was on Waqf. So my understanding is that the solution will come from a synthesis. It will not come either from within Islam or either from without Islam. So there would be a synthesis, and the problem will come out of this synthesis, and the problem will come out of such dialogues.
I have some comments obviously saved for the end. Let me just say one or two things that I've been thinking about throughout the discussion. And of course I share many of the similar areas of interest that my colleague Zubair does. But I think the point about understanding the rise of modern Islamist movements, particularly those that are now creating these, you mentioned Sharia zones throughout the world. It's an interesting term. It has to be explained politically. These groups are very much a product of modernity. You can say they're a reaction to, fine, whatever language you want to use, but they arise out of the modern condition. In the particular political environments, you can go down the list. Okay? You know, two countries mentioned earlier that, you know, Pakistan, we hope and pray that Pakistan doesn't become a failed state like Somalia or Afghanistan and whatever. And these countries are interesting because we often look at, well, these Islamist groups, the Taliban in Afghanistan and in Somalia, the Islamic Courts Union, etc., and their desire for Sharia and all sorts of other, you know, things. That is the cause of the problem. Well, these societies were dysfunctional before these groups emerged as well. They're pretty bad shape because, again, coming back to this post-colonial analysis of these societies, Somalia was in civil war. The group that came that restored some form of order temporarily was the Islamic Courts Union. One can say that even about Afghanistan pre-Taliban. The reason why people were willing to give them a chance was because they restored order in a chaotic civil war conditions. Of course, they became as bad or if not worse. But so the rise of these groups, I mean, look at Boko Haram in Nigeria. All of it, secular modernity and its often depraved politics in these societies. A lot of the explanation for the rise of these groups comes from there. Syria is Syria and Iraq. I mean, you can't get any better than that. Syria, you have a case in which, and my fear is 2 or 3 decades, maybe even before, maybe very soon, we'll be asking the same questions. What went wrong in Syria? How are this Islamist, this reactionary Al-Qaeda, Wahhabi discourse, a country where there existed no Wahhabi discourse before Syria, very, very kind of horribly politically, but must be conceded on these grounds. There's no kind of sector fundamentalism. Now has been flooded.
Everybody wants it.
Now is flooded with jihadis and that discourse, etc. And of course, the society will be transformed right in front of our eyes, and we'll ask very innocently in 2 or 3 decades, why is Syria so fundamentalist? Well, there was a political history that has led to now what has happened, and we have to take some responsibility for that. Pakistan, Afghanistan is another great example. It's not to say that these problems and etc. and religious fundamentalism didn't exist before, but the scale and the level of kind of So in Pakistan, and I often say this, you did have this not unproblematic orthodoxy that's always existed, and it can be critiqued from various angles for its conservatism, traditionalism, and so on and so forth. But the conversion of that not unproblematic orthodoxy into a militant, repugnant fundamentalism takes place in a particular historical moment. Late 70s, 80s, everyone was a part of it, everyone embraced it and supported it for a particular objective, and that was to bring down the Soviet communists. Here, you wake up the next day, look, this masala that we've created, this Frankenstein, comes back to haunt. Well, that people are not light switches you can turn on and off. You indoctrinate kids, orphans often, from the Afghan war in an ideology of fundamentalism, and then the next day, after, yesterday was jihad, boys, now pack up, go work at a KFC or something, or a McDonald's. No, gosh, if only human beings were that easy. So I like the point of taking responsibility and ownership. It's very easy to blame but these were some objectives that our society, state had. Not all, of course, I'm not saying everyone embraced those, but a lot of people were willing the kind of, and this is the logical outcome. So this Sharia, all of this discourse, etc., yes, the theological debates, of course, are incredibly important. But understanding the larger political context is equally important. And the final thing, in terms of the solutions, I agree with everyone here, that, or at least most people, saying there's no kind of singular solution. The pluralism, etc., of the discourse will be the discourses, and the praxis and the action will be the solution. There has to be that pluralism. I think the problem of the 20th century, particularly the rise of kind of ideologies, etc., was precisely the fact that you had people advocating single model solutions for every place and time and so on and so forth. And that led to incredible disasters, lots of deaths, state-sanctioned murder, so on and so forth. So it's, I think, precisely a new ethos of pluralism, the acceptance of that pluralism, that could potentially lead to kind of some, solution is a big term, but at least some amelioration, some remedies for our societies. Yeah.
My name is Mr. Bhatt, I have one question. Is it already quite common to do?
Zarur, go ahead.
मसला ये है कि मैंने बड़े यहाँ पे लोगों की बातें सुनी, और उससे मुझे कुछ ऐसे एहसास हुआ कि people are going for interpreters and interpretations of Islam rather than reading the actual book. And बहुत मैंने नोटिस किया कि हमारी यंगर ऑडियंस जनरेशन है, कहती है यार माँ ने पढ़े सानू भी पढ़ने की जरूरत है, ओदी जेडी गल होई ठीक होई. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So do you think that moving away from the book and then listening to numerous interpretations और तरह तरह के शरिया के जो डिफरेंट फिके हैं उनको सही करने से आप ये समझने लग रहे हैं कि जनाब औरतें और मर्द बराबर नहीं हैं, औरतें मर्दों की मलकियत होती हैं, एंड नॉट वाइस वर्सा, एंड दीज काइंड ऑफ कॉन्सेप्ट्स जो कि मेरे ख्याल से यहाँ जितने भी बच्चे बैठे हुए हैं उनके दिमाग में ये चीज़ चल रही है। तो डू यू थिंक वी आर मूविंग अवे फ्रॉम द बुक and more towards the interpretation, because we think that is much easier to understand, and that is actually causing some kind of friction कि जिसमें ये आपके शरीयत रूल्स बन रही हैं, different organizations rise पे आ रही हैं, extremism, fundamentalism, blah 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 blah.
I think both streams are moving, so it's not, I can't just answer you that either or. So we have this whole Salafi movement is that going back to the book, going back to the tradition, and the whole critique of political Islam is that it's untraditional. So most of and one of the critique which is very much valid, that in brotherhood, what you see that most of the people are trained in natural sciences. They're engineers, they are physicists, but you rarely find a social scientist there. And they want to, they are giving a new interpretation to Quran and Hadith, which is not tradition, right? So Taqleed has its own problems, but it has its own advantages too, because you have this whole repertoire of scholarship. So people have worked on it. It's not that you can simply write them off, that they are ahistoric, they are archaic, we don't need them. So we need interpretation of primary sources with the passage of time. And this is what I'll quote Iqbal here, what he said in his famous lecture, that this is very much inbuilt, ingrained within the structure of, within the methodology of Islam, that Islam needs to be interpreted with the passage of time. It's not static. Right? So we are not bound by whatever different scholars said, but we can definitely get guidance from them. So the role of fiqh or our traditional sciences is to guide us, but this is problematic if we just take them for granted. So if we have a problem, so there are so many problems like cloning or medical ethics, right? DNA and these things. We don't find any solution in traditional books, because in those days these problems did not exist. So this is now the responsibility of modern scholars, that they should interpret fiqh in the context, modern context.
So shouldn't there be like a self-evaluation of all the scholars to check how much insane they are before we actually agree that this guy is telling something that is to the point? Because most of the people who have met are mentally insane. Religious scholars as well as scientists who are either closet atheists or either some socialists or revolutionists or anarchists. And then what they talk about, at some point they are very congruent. Yeah, we should have a strong education system, but the way they want to introduce education system into the country is something that really gives you nightmares.
Sure. Thanks. Zubair's got more than his fair share of time now. He was complaining before. I think we have nothing to complain about. There's a hand here. Yes.
I just wanted to make
Sorry, Will.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, my question isn't as detailed or subjective as the other questions that you may have had, but I'd like to hear anybody's perspective on this. Now, in the recent years, it's become apparent to me that in order for us to find a solution for this mess, however you'd like to define mess, is to have this sense of unity. Now, I know that word's been used quite a lot and people, kind of overplay it, but regardless of that, the thing is, we need to find a solution. We need resources for finding the solution, and we also spoke about money earlier and how it's being used. Now the thing is, there's a large portion of our society that effectively does have the majority of the wealth, and they also have the majority of the resources and access to these resources. How is it that, at least in your opinion, that we can get these people involved in such a discussion, in getting together and pooling these resources and brainstorming and breaking down these barriers and actually sitting down to listen to one another and share ideas?
Again, this is not something which is just peculiar to Pakistan. If you see that 99% movement that they have in the US, where they say that 1%, or I don't know how small a percentage of 1% owns, I don't know. I mean, I think there was some figure of 670 people owning more than, I think, 3/4 of the world put together. So again, this is not something which is just peculiar to Pakistan. Of course, one would love, and that's what the effort should be, to engage those people. But the thing is, those people will not engage with us, because the thing is, they are the ones who have the power. And the people who have power, they want to strengthen that and further kind of protect that, rather than be engaged with things. And these are people who are above the law. These are people who are, in a sense, people behind the throne, so to speak. So, but that's the challenge. That these are the people that one has to reach, and it will not be easy. But just because it's something which is difficult, the point is that one should not give that up. That in a sense, these are people through different mediums. One tries to engage with them. One, in a sense, understand what is it that they hold within their grasp. Just because it's not just money, it's the influence that they're able to kind of peddle. It's the policies that these people are able to influence. And again, in a sense, if these are industrialists, then they would want those policies which favor them, and in a sense, at the cost of, great cost to the rest of the country, the population. These people, it's not in their interest to sit across the table. The point is, how do you, in a sense, invent a new kind of strategy, a negotiation that these people are actually brought together, where they do not feel threatened, but in a sense, one feels that, accountable is a big word, but in a sense, where there needs to be some engagement. Otherwise, one could say that maybe over time, the influence and the money that we have, that would be drained. So there needs to be better awareness amongst people. So in a sense, rather than engaging with this person or this group which has the money, why not start letting these people know that these are the people who have the influence? So let them write to them, let them, in a sense, not elect them, let them kind of, rather than an individual, you inform the people who are maybe the have-nots. Let them come together. So, but it's not again something which is peculiar to Pakistan.
Thank you for it.
Thank you.
Yes.
My comment just now you mentioned, first I'll talk about that, accountability. I think unless we have accountability, I don't think people can really move forward. If they do, they'll probably end up coming back and they'll be further away from doing what they were doing. Number two, what I really wanted to say was that I feel, as a single mother of 3 children, that we have actually moved away from the basics that when we were growing up, we were taught. And they were, whether we were brainwashed, you can say, they were ingrained, and we remember those to this day. For people like us, it's very difficult to keep telling our children what we have learned when they see that everything else is totally different and going in different directions. So rather than doing, the simple thing to do right now is to go back to the basics. In our schools, I feel that the basics have been forgotten and they have jumped right forward to how to use the latest technology, how to manipulate these resources, how to tell people that, look, I know all of this, but do they really know that they should not be lying, they should not be stealing, They should not be hurting people. They should be compassionate. And that goes for, for people treating their own country that way as well.
Yeah.
So we are not doing that. We are sitting here discussing all of this. How are we going to go back to the basics? Because I think that is what we really need to do right now. Schools are not teaching us the basics. To this day, I'm scared of my parents, even though they are not going to do anything to me. But there is certain respect that was taught, and there was that paid off for me. That will pay off for my kids too. So we need to actually address those issues. Maybe simultaneously, but
No, thank you for that. Very, very important. Is there another hand before, when we're going to wrap up soon? Any other new hand here? Okay, there. Yeah.
Just following on from what my wife said, and this lady here, she was talking about we take pride in acknowledging one's vehicle or their watch, their status. And that we also take pride that we have help at home, we have servants, maid, etc. I'd just like to put a question to everybody here in this room, after listening to us. How many of us today are willing to say to our servants, look, I'll still pay you, but I want you to go back to school. I don't want you to be in that category where somebody classifies you as a slave worker or as a labor. In the UK, for example, a driver earns a very good salary. A taxi driver earns a very good salary. A musician, a tutor earns a very good salary. But here, they're considered nothing. So I'd like to ask how many people would be willing to give up their help at home and maybe still pay them. That's your little bit, as you were saying, towards society, and saying, go back to school. And when maybe that person goes back to school and gets an education, their children will look at them and say, hey, you know what, I need to follow my parents.
Very good one. Should we go by one? Ask the question to each of them. No. What we're going to do now is any burning last questions, comments, very brief, and then I'll ask all the panelists to give some final remarks, then we'll wrap things up. So we had some of the same hands, that's fine as long as it's brief. Did you have anything to say? Yeah.
Based on general opinions from this discussion, I do agree that moral values are really important. But you know how religion, isn't it supposed to be private? Like in context to Islam too, like many ulama say, like religion is supposed to be private. Then why is it discussed such publicly, and why is it such a big problem?
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, quickly. She set a great precedent, very brief. There are no other hands?
Sure.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, all right. Just in the end, the point that he made about Islam, I think that is a point that is very, very valid. Sadly speaking, our young generation is becoming disillusioned with regards to what Islam is all about. Sadly, because of what is being perceived, how it is being perceived, we need to go to the book ourselves. Seriously, we do. Seriously, we do. If you don't understand Arabic as a translation, I would say go back to the English translation, whatever makes sense to you, but go back to the book yourself.
Yeah.
Believe you me, it has a different narrative altogether. Who speaks of social equality? This book does. Who speaks about smile being a charity? This book does. It even says, don't say, oye yaar, yaar. So no, it even says that, say, excuse me, please regard us. It even says that. It speaks of mannerism, it speaks of contemplation, it speaks of social equality.
Yes.
I think we need to start going back to this book ourselves rather than
Guys.
I mean, even at time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there was nothing known as a mullah, for example. You know, there were people who were practicing and preaching Islam at the same time. You cannot preach unless you practice it. So essentially, Islam was not owned by a few people, which sadly has become now. It was rather what people were all about. I mean, you get up in the morning, you help with the household work, you go out, You work hard for your living, you maintain your family. The women are not property, but rather the men are responsible for them. They are responsible to maintain them, you know. So they're not the property really. So when it comes to these kind of things, we need to go back to the book ourselves and understand that what we are lacking is actually some of us reach. And मैं एक और दूसरा point make करूँगी कि the cool thing nowadays is being the fashion thing, you know. Fashion thing is the cool thing is if you are wearing sleeveless or without whatever. So that is okay, but why aren't those abaya people acceptable too? Both the sides. Right. I mean, why are the abayas hating the sleeveless ones, and why are the sleeveless ones equally hating the abaya ones and calling them uncool? I mean, there was an interview I was watching of a family living in America, and they were very simply saying that the abaya, the women who wear hijabs and abayas, they are more accepted by the Americans there. And it is when we walk into the Pakistani gatherings, the get-togethers, that is when we get ignored.
Interesting.
You know? That is when they say, no, these are the uncool ones.
Interesting point.
These are the uncool ones.
The level of
so
tolerance and
acceptance. Yeah, what language we are using, how we are dressing up, those are changing. I mean, I need to be of a certain way to be accepted in the society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have, can we wrap things up?
I was just going to say, make a point actually, it was on the question, and that is, you know, Islam is a framework.
Right.
And as the gentleman there said, it's not set in stone. And as time has progressed, I think Islam offers that flexibility for you to adapt. Okay. I have never read anywhere that men and women are not equal in Islam, so I don't know where that came from. And I've read the book. So the only thing I've read is that according to Allah Ta'ala, man is, I wouldn't even say slightly superior. He's just been given a different makeup to a woman. So she has strengths that he doesn't have, and he has physical strength that she doesn't have. But in everything that I've read from the scriptures, they're equal parts.
Thank you very much. Let's get some final thoughts and then wrap up. Can we start with you?
Again, on the question of modern education and formal education, again, as somebody who's been teaching at NAM for like 30 to 14 years now and teaching in other places, modern education is rarely about teaching morals to students. So don't even go there, don't even think that they will provide that. That is the responsibility that the parents, the general society, so for people who kind of abrogate that responsibility to somehow that they will get education and that will improve the morals of their kids is never really going to work. About servants' education, I think that's a very valid point. Again, उसमें मैं सिर्फ ये कहूँगा that I haven't done that I've asked people who work in our house that they should go and work, but at least whoever has worked in our house, whenever they have children, so what we do is we pay for the education of their children. So again, but you're right, maybe we should go a step further and say, okay, they are able to go to school, but again, since I've been in Pakistan, whenever we employ somebody, they have children, we pay for their education. The last thing was about going back to the book. I think again, I don't know, I mean, in a sense, whether one should say that, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter. One is not saying that going back to basics or going back to just Islam, that in a sense it doesn't really matter what your religion is. All books, all religions, one should go back to those. So in a sense the point is, it's not just our book, it's not just our way of life, it's not just our things were better. I mean, our golden period is somebody else's dark ages. So the point is that, you know, you can, if you want to go back, you can go to Bullish and you can learn a lot. Okay. So again, it should not be just one book. Book is always about interpretation. Okay. There is one text and I can have 1,000,001 interpretations of it. The point is, आपकी interpretation है, fine, I'm looking at it, I have something, so fine, you know, then let's just accept. So the point is, to whoever, in a sense, whatever it is that provides you with that enlightened past, you should follow that.
Thank you for that.
So essentially agreeing with all that Farooq Saab said and agreeing with all of the statements that were made about going back to basics, etc. My narrative is slightly different. I come from a multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multicultural family, right? So tolerance is something that is within my very being, otherwise my survival would have been really hard from the family that I come from. So I learned that at home. And I could never understand why after 12 years at the convent, 2 years at Lahore Grammar, then studying for law, then being trained as a lawyer in England, then being trained as a lawyer in the States, why tolerance was such a big issue for people, because, you know, why are people otherizing? Within Pakistan, for instance, one exercise that we go to through great lengths to is to otherize other communities. कि जी नहीं, जो हम हैं ये नहीं है, ये लोग जो हैं ये ऐसे करते हैं, हम लोग ऐसे नहीं करते, right? I'll take you to your constitution. There's a word in there that is used very casually, that of non-Muslim, ठीक है, which gets transferred in Urdu into क्या? गैर मुसलमान, ठीक है? आपने पूरी community को गैर बना दिया, सही? अब वो जो गैर वाली community है, in normal speak, ठीक? You're talking about the lower middle class, you're talking about people who don't really have access to education and critical thought. उनके लिए गैर का क्या मतलब है? वो इंसान जो हमारे में से नहीं है, ठीक? So आप start से ही at a very very basic level, that being your constitution, उसके अंदर गैर का concept introduce करा के side पे हो गए हैं, right? Are Muslims called non-Christian when they're in the US? Are you called non-Christian when you're in the UK? So why am I called non-Muslim when I'm here? Like, what sort of title is that to have? Why can't we identify people positively? कि चलो ठीक है, Christians, Muslims, Baha'is, Hindus, फर्क religions को आप positively identify करें, बजाय ये कि negative non वाली identification हो, ठीक? आपने एक दफ़ा otherize कर लिया, आपने एक दफ़ा division create कर ली, उस division को overcome करना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है, क्योंकि वो एक mindset बन जाती है. Once you learn a lesson, it's hard to unlearn it. Once you learn the lesson of intolerance and of hate, it becomes so easy to propagate it कि आप realize भी नहीं करते कि आप कर रहे हो. There's a reason why within the Christian community, for instance, the only Christians you will come across are those that work as your domestic help. You will not come into contact with until and unless you've studied at a minority or a missionary school, or you have made the effort of making friends with people outside of the religion कि आप उनके साथ interact करेंगे, क्योंकि as far as the upper middle class goes, everybody who could migrate has migrated. The only people left behind are those people who feel a certain sense of affinity towards this land, to be चलो ठीक है हम भी पाकिस्तानी हैं, क्यों हम छोड़ के जाएं मुल्क, right? But it's really sad when you look at the lives of these minority communities living within Pakistan and you see कि जो immigrant narratives होते हैं कि यहाँ से जो immigrate करके गए हैं बाहर, उनकी first generation narrative और indigenous minorities का narrative same है. Indigenous minorities who've been living here for decades have the same narratives as immigrant communities. So there's definitely something wrong that we're doing. Forced conversions of Hindu girls, okay? That is something that's happening in South Punjab, that is something that's happening in interior Sindh. But why aren't we willing to raise our voices against it? Because it's not happening to us. हमारे साथ तो नहीं हो रहा. ये तो उन गैरों के साथ हो रहा है. चलो ठीक है, कोई मसला नहीं. Maybe we don't rationalize these things out in this manner, but this is what's playing at the back of our mind because we picked it up at some place. Like your subconscious works in the most amazing of ways कि आपको पता भी नहीं होता और आपके पीछे चीजें इस तरह की चल रही होती हैं. ठीक, something that I've learned being a lawyer, being in courts every single day is to keep my mouth shut now. Even though my bread and butter needs to be my mouth because that I'm a litigator. I need to speak in front of a judge, but I can't comment on social issues, I can't comment on current affairs because I don't know which bullet has my name on it afterwards. Rashid Rahman, that was the biggest awakening that came to all of us activists कि भाई आपने किसी को डिफेंड भी करने जाना है ब्लास्फेमी के चक्करों में तो आप दूर दूर भागें क्योंकि आपको मार दिया जाएगा. And this guy who Rashid Rahman was defending is a former Fulbright scholar. So where does that leave all of these students that are going to the States, are getting this education, are coming back and exposed to critical thinking, but you come here, you want to change the system and you piss off someone so much that they just want to come and exterminate you from the face of this earth. ये level of intolerance है that we need to counter against. And it's not really so much about, teaching your help or teaching somebody else. It's essentially about emulating these roles and emulating these values. क्योंकि वो post-colonial वाली legacy है क्या कि हम hierarchies को accept करते हैं. ठीक, अगर हायरार्की के अंदर जिस इंसान को हम अपने से बड़ा समझते हैं उसका बैग बड़ा अच्छा है, हम कहेंगे यार वही वाला बैग चाहिए मुझे। अगर उस इंसान के तौर तरीके रहने के अच्छे हैं, हमारे भी तौर तरीके क्यों नहीं अच्छे होंगे? एम्यूलेशन वाली स्टोरी है ना सारी। So somebody wants to act in a completely vapid and in a completely shallow manner, we will follow that person क्योंकि वो जी hierarchy में हमारे से ऊपर है, this is what we want to strive to be. Once you start making human rights, once you start making tolerance, once you start making all of these concepts fashionable, people will follow suit. क्योंकि वही hierarchy के concepts and the way that I structure, especially in my classes, like even when I'm preparing my briefs for my cases, is that there are two streams of thought. एक is होती है और एक ought होती है. There's one that's normative, one that's prescriptive. You can talk about the is on the one hand and you can talk about the ought on the other, but the moment you start conflating the two, you end up with a hodgepodge of situations. होना ऐसे चाहिए, मगर ऐसे है, किस तरह करें, और आप फिर बैठ जाते हो. If you keep those oughts at one level and you know what the situation on ground is without highlighting it or without downplaying it, मतलब जो है वो है, उसको आप आगे लेके चले तो आपके पास कॉन्क्रीट और वर्केबल सॉल्यूशंस आएंगे. आपको पता है कि ये इंटॉलरेंस का एक मसला है, बजाय ये कहना कि ओहो वो सिर्फ यहाँ पे नहीं है, which I mean I agree with what you're talking about, how कि ये perspective होना चाहिए, but you have to understand the problem is a problem. You have to deal with it, you have to counter it, whether you do it by looking at other places, what they've done and forming an indigenous solution, that's up to you. But the first part is realizing that yeah, there is a problem. I mean, things aren't as hunky-dory as we want to make them out to be. So with that backdrop, essentially, I just say that invest in people and give them time to see that okay, this person is sitting in this position and instead of her bag and instead of my shoes, she's actually looking at me and talking to me about what I think. अच्छा ये भी हो सकता है, अच्छा हम बैठ के आइडियाज़ के बारे में भी बात कर सकते हैं, अच्छा चलो ठीक है. So that's what you need to do with people. Why did everybody go after Imran Khan? It was fashionable to wear those MK Nation shirts. Everybody wanted it. I didn't vote for the PTI, but I bought one of those shirts. Everybody had them. Like, nahi, khareedna hai. So, that's just how it works. You don't need to agree with the politics of someone. You don't need to agree with the policies of some person. But if somebody impresses you enough, go and let them know. Because the way everything is working, how, negative people have become, how you need to stay shut in places, people are looking for other people just to come up to them and say, kya chalo koi nahi, I'm in this with you as well. So I think that's how the change comes about and how it happens per se. You just appreciate people for who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And finally,
Alright, so I'll just stick to only one point. I'll be a bit more contentious and thought-provoking here. Since I'm the last one, I want to give you some food for thought and you go from here. So I would talk about the social logic of things, the way things are. And I want to stick to 3 examples. One is the issue of labor, domestic labor. That gentleman mentioned that, okay, he had this experience in the UK, people don't find domestic workers and then everyone is paid equal amount. Why do you think is that? Is it because of cultural reasons? Is it because Christians are there, they just tend to be more careful, more equal society? Yes, there might be multiple reasons. One reason I want to specify is the population factor. Population is small, and the rate of increase in population is in minus, right? So there is shortage of labor. That's why you don't find people there. But here we have excess population, extra labor, people are willing to work you for periods. This is a social logic of the way things are the way they are and how they are different in the UK and in Pakistan. Second issue is issue of women's rights. And here Islam becomes very important. Just give you one example that how here again coming to that we should go back to the book. So there is only one ayat of Quran that is called ayat al-Dain, which requires that if you enter into a transaction, you should get it right, have one male witness, and if you don't have, get two female witnesses, right? Now this ayah is interpreted in such a way that woman is half of a man, right? And then you relate it with inheritance, where women get half of a man. And then this is so generalized that in every walk of life, woman is half of a man, right? Now, interestingly, this ayat dain, this is ayat 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah, it requires that every transaction should be written down. Now, traditionally, fuqaha don't accept a document which is written down unless it is endorsed by witnesses, right? So actually they are not accepting the first part of the ayah, and they are generalizing the second part of the ayah, where one woman becomes half of a man. This is the social logic, social structure of that tribal society, where women, because they were physically different from men, and that was a tribal society where human power, physical labor was more in value than intellectual power and capacity. A third example, which we just find very common in Pakistan. Okay, so this event was supposed to start at 7:30, but Pakistani hai na 8 baje, right? Or you see Pakistanis always come late. Have you ever thought why it happens? Is it because of biological reasons? Is there genetically problematic with us? Why is it so, right? Well, there could be again multiple. Yeah. So again multiple explanations. But one explanation which I want to quote here is that this is again social structure of the society. If society is based on it's an industrialized society. In order to start work, all workers should have to come at some specific time. But if it's an agrarian society, if it's sole proprietorship, it does not matter if you are late 1 hour, you can work 1 hour more, right? You're flexible because these are your fields, this is your shop. If you just go late, it won't affect other people. But if you work in an organized society, in a factory, apart from knowledge factory, then you have to be on time. If you're not on time, things will not work. This is how people in certain societies are disciplined, they are on time, they are just like machines, just like Germans, right? Because their society's social structure is like that. It's not because we are genetically inferior. And I'll stop here.
I'm sure. Thank you for that. I have to say at least one or two comments at the end, but I'd start off by saying this. I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you to the panelists and to the audience for really making this an enriching discussion. And I had a couple of points, but I think I'll reduce them to one or two. Coming back to that Sharia thing, because it in some ways it keeps coming back in the context of Pakistan, in the context of the Muslim world. As much as people like me will argue that we need to look at other factors as well, and religious discourse and the rise of Islamist movements, etc., there are other explanations. It still remains as an issue, as a quote-unquote problem in many societies. And I think that this is where I'm trying to relate it to some of the other points that were made. One person spoke about the issue, and it really made me think, and that's why I said the issue of equality. How much do we really believe? And someone else spoke about how why one would consider the book of the Quran to be advocating inequality. Don't we want, the assumption in that comment was that everyone wants equality, whether from an Islamic discourse, a religious discourse, or from a secular discourse. That's a pretty big assumption. A lot of people have now spoken about how many of us love our hierarchies and the stratification. So forget about religion and Islam. It's the day-to-day living that all of us engage in. That's a great kind of assumption for when we're engaged in discourse at an intellectual level. But at the practical, concrete, it's a really that assumption may or may not be warranted on the part of many people who come from middle and upper middle class in this country, whether they really believe in that equality. And this is where religious discourse, as much as I'm placing the emphasis on kind of sociological and political analysis, I think one of the mistakes, bringing it back to Pakistan, of secular human rights activists, women rights activists, etc., is to perhaps, and I say this, and you may be puzzled, not take religion seriously enough. And by that I mean, when we speak correctly about how religion was used as a tool during the Islamization, etc., yes, he fooled everyone. Well, you know, most political leaders will use some language vocabulary that resonates with the mass of the population. Now, that's not to say that everyone was born and genetically subscribed to that particular interpretation of Islam. But in many societies, not just Muslim societies, but in many Muslim majority societies, religion is a serious matter, for better or worse. It's not to take a position on it. And I think that secular, liberal, that human rights discourse ignores it at its own peril. That is to say, that one does not need to only exclusively say that, well, we need to figure out a progressive discourse from within Islam. No, I think, like I said earlier, the pluralistic, secular-based discourse has its role and it's always had its role in Pakistan. But at the same time, I think it's very, very clear, the kind of history and the evidence points it out, that if we don't have people challenging the monopolization of Islamic discourse by the right wing, this country will continue to be in a mess. And many Muslim societies, Muslim majority societies, will be in a mess. So we do need to create space. And this is kind of a message to those of us that openly, say we belong to kind of the liberal human rights culture in this society, etc. We need to make space for faith-based people as well, who believe that, yes, religion has something positive to offer, that there's social justice, politics, whatever, is maybe inspired by their faith and their religion. And they may use a language and vocabulary. I mean, this is the great thing. I mean, people love an individual like Martin Luther King. Most of you will be familiar, great civil rights, black civil rights activist in the US. Here's the interesting thing about Martin Luther King. Never used really the term human rights, never. His discourse very much came from the Southern Baptist Church, spoke about how the Israelites were liberated from the Pharaoh, and very kind of a religious paradigm, but incredibly inspiring. Wasn't an exclusivist, wasn't parochial, but had a religious narrative that inspired his political practice towards social justice, peace, and equality. So I think in this country, at this particular moment, we also need to create space for these alternative discourses. That's a message to many of us who are in the human rights community, that just because a person has kind of a religious discourse which is inspiring and they believe just as much as you do against patriarchy, misogyny, against exclusivist and discrimination against minorities, and so but they do believe their Islam is on their side, we need to create space for those people. And we need to actually encourage that discourse in this country to get it out of the mess that it is. The final thing I'll say is just this issue of education. It's very important. Many of us are educators here. And I think that the discussion and what Zoe emphasized earlier on about, it's not just kind of education. What is that education about? Someone said that this country is full of uneducated illiterates. Well, if it doesn't really matter if they're educated, if they're being educated with nonsense, if they're being fed nonsense. So that's kind of irrelevant then. So it's also figuring out what that education is about. What are the values? People spoke about the basics. Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I really agreed with that comment. Are we creating ethical, humane human beings that care about the world? I mean, we haven't even spoken about kind of the crises this planet faces right now, the ecological, all sorts of crises. What does it mean to be a human being in the middle of all of the stuff that's going on right now? Forget about that. What we are producing is kind of people that can play with the latest technology and be nice consumers who want to become part of basically the global elite. This is what the higher forms of education is doing. And so I think that point is incredibly important. What are the values that undergird that undergird the educational systems we set up, all of the institutions that we set up in the society. With that, I will end, and again, thank you all for being here, for your patience, and thank you to the panelists and to the knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, and especially today for moderating, and Dr. Farooq and Zoe and Dr. Zubair. Thank you everyone for attending and being a part of it. Just a couple of minutes if I may have. It was very interesting to me how the whole conversation, I mean the topic was Pakistan, lekin what it centered around was really, I thought, religion and education. And of course then we talked about active citizenry, which is very important for us. इस वाले platform के साथ ही what we intend to do is sort of expose students, and this is essentially targeting students, school students. So the regular sessions we plan on going school to school, doing a campaign, inviting students to come here and expose them to what critical thinking is, how you engage in a discussion topic-wise through these critical thinking skills and seeding dialogue and some active citizenry. I hope everyone will support our effort. Please help us spread the word. And this is a completely not-for-project, volunteer-based project. So any help will be appreciated, of course. And especially thank you for the LUM community and the faculty especially, because this is really a faculty reaching out, the university expanding into the local community, what's happening here. So special thanks for you guys.
All right, thank you. No, thank you guys.